The archetypal pirate would not be complete without a parrot or monkey on his shoulder, so much so that some have come to dismiss the association as a myth. Falsely so, because pirates and sailors in the Age of Sail did indeed keep pets, parrots and monkeys among them, but also dogs, cats, various farm animals, aside from the vermin that would follow aboard or outside the ship. A 17th century sail ship was a floating menagerie of braying, barking, yowling, and cackling. Pets were kept for a multitude of reasons. Naturally, some pirates just desired companionship. Pets could also fill a utilitarian purpose. Farm animals would provide fresh food, cats could be used in pest control, and dogs for hunting and tracking. Game, both four and two-legged. But the exotic animals were also a valuable trade good. A colorful parrot or a playful monkey could be sold off for a purse of gold, or in a desperate case, a bottle of rum. Animals could be bought. The more mundane kind were usually sold in colonial or old world ports, whereas the exotic sort might best be found among native peoples, who often tamed them for this purpose. Pirates, being pirates, would also steal animals. Some animals were property of the crew, usually those used for provisioning. Pets, on the other hand, were considered a luxury item, akin to fine weapons and clothing. They were sold on auction by the quartermaster at the foremast, and purchased by any crewman with the funds. Other pets might just have been owned by the pirate before setting sail, and accompanied his master aboard. With the basics out of the way, let's take a look at the different pets in particular. Starting out with the most iconic, the parrot. This colorful bird has been popularized as a pirate pet, arguably since Robinson Crusoe. A fictional character, Robinson was never a pirate, but he did tame a couple of parrots, one of which he named Paul, and taught him to speak. Additionally, Robinson was based on Alexander Selkirk, a real-life privateer who was self-marooned in the South Pacific, and William, a mosquito buccaneer who was marooned by accident. It isn't known if either of these rogues ever tamed parrots. In 1883, a parrot appeared on the shoulder of the fictional Long John Silver, main antagonist of Treasure Island. This book is what cemented pirates and parrots as a cliché, so much so that some modern works have avoided parrots altogether, even though they certainly were a common pirate pet. But even though the words are similar, pirates did not have a particular fondness of the feathered fiends. They were just a precious commodity. The cultural association of pirates and parrots did not really exist in the period, but it's not that it didn't exist either. If you look at a typical 17th or 18th century map or depiction of the New World or Africa, you're bound to find a colorful parrot in there. Parrots were an exotic mascot of the unexplored tropics. And ever since the dawn of the Age of Exploration, parrots were an item of prestige and status. A must-have at every royal court and aristocratic household. Plenty are the paintings and images showing men and women of noble status posing with parrots. The customers were rich, demand was high, and supply was low, making parrots the perfect trade good. Sailors and travelers were the best medium through which to purchase a parrot, and these men themselves were well aware of it. They would do their best to acquire a parrot when traveling, by any means necessary. Native peoples were well accustomed to the animals, and soon picked up on this high demand to make a profit. The Carib were some of the most prominent parrot catchers. Jean-Baptiste Labat, a priest who sailed with pirates, described how the Carib would catch them. They would first find a tree in which the parrots roosted at night. When it was dark, they lit a charcoal fire beneath the tree. gum and green pimento, was put on the fire, producing a smoke that intoxicated the parrots and made them fall to the ground unconscious. The caribou then tied their wings and legs and brought them to their senses with water. To tame the birds, the caribou did not give them any food until they were hungry, and only by hand. If the parrot bit them, they would blow tobacco smoke on the bird's beak, temporarily choking it and forcing it to behave. In a short while, the parrots would learn to talk. These methods are not exactly up to 21st century standards. Pirates were often friends with peoples like the Carib, but they would often acquire parrots as plunder. William Dampier, the Buccaneer explorer, wrote a detailed account of a raid in which parrots were acquired. A company of 60, distributed between 2 barks, attacked the Mexican town of Alvarado. 10 casualties were sustained in the taking of the fort, and most of the inhabitants managed to flee with their possessions. The Buccaneers stole 25 heads of cattle, a few hogs, who apparently tasted like fish, cocks, hens, ducks, and tame parrots. These were kept in cages, and the Buccaneers took so many that almost every man had 1 or 2. But as the raiders got underway, they were pursued by a Spanish armadilla. In order to escape, the pirates had to dump most, if not all of their cargo overboard. Possibly the parrots also, but Dampier isn't clear about this. It must have been a terrible sight, seeing the parrots trying to escape their cages as they sank beneath the ocean. If the pirate managed to get away with his bird, keeping them wasn't always easy. These are noisome animals, though many pirates seem to have appreciated the talkativeness. However, parrots are quite maintenance-heavy and need a lot of food, especially if they get bored. They are intelligent animals that require constant stimuli. Being kept inside of a cage aboard a ship must have been terribly boring to them, and if they weren't kept in a cage, they were liable to escape. One sailor remarked how keeping a parrot aboard was more difficult than a wife and 2 children. Monkeys have become more associated with pirates over time, seemingly starting with the 1926 film The Black Pirate. They are exotic, active, cute, and have a tendency to get into trouble, making them a perfect feature in any pirate story. You might recognize them from films like Cutthroat Island or the more famous POTC franchise. Monkeys were in a similar boat to parrots in that they were a popular, exotic pet in the old world, and thus in high demand. They were often kept with a belt around their waist to have them on a leash, and this might have been done at sea in order to keep them from climbing into the rigging and causing trouble. We have archaeological evidence of monkeys aboard ships. The skeleton of a 6-month-old Barbary macaque was discovered in the 1704 shipwreck of the privateer ship Dauphin. It was found in the kitchen area of the ship, indicating that it might have been the keepsake of the cook, much like the parrot of Long John Silver. Much like the parrot, monkeys may only have been kept as a trade good to be sold in part, but some may have been kept as personal pets. Often known as jackanapes, 3 or 4 could be purchased for an old hat in Africa. European noblemen might even commission an agent, merchant, or sailor to acquire him a monkey. This could lead to some odd incidents, monkey business, you might say. A French agent in Senegal received a commission to bring 4 or 5 monkeys back to his master in France. But this had been poorly written as 4 or 500 monkeys. The agent had no idea how he would acquire so many, but eventually managed to obtain 330. That's pretty impressive. These were shipped back to La Rochelle in good condition, though a few managed to escape and jump overboard. The agent feared that his master would be angry over him missing the mark, and for sure, the master was angry, but not for the reason he imagined. A lawyer managed to sell the case, and the master spent the next few months giving out fine new companions to his friends and family. Pirates would also encounter monkeys in the wilderness. Dampier described them unfavorably as the ugliest he ever saw. Groups of 30 would jump from tree to tree, dancing and chattering, pelting newcomers with sticks, poo and pee, just like me in kindergarten. Some pirates did not appreciate this whatsoever and would shoot the monkeys, sometimes out of frustration, sometimes out of sheer psychopathic amusement. One filibuster described the joy a group of his comrades got out of shooting a monkey and watching it desperately clutch its bleeding wound. Others would shoot the monkeys for sustenance. One monkey shot by pirates was a mother whose infant was taken by them and offered to Père Cabasson, superior general of the Jacobin mission of Saint-Domingue. It became very attached to its master and never needed a chain. However, when the Père went to preach, the monkey was kept locked up in his room. On one occasion, the monkey escaped and followed Cabasson to the church. It hid behind the pulpit, and when the man started to preach, the monkey climbed up on the ledge behind him and started grimacing and imitating his gesticulations. The congregation could not help laughing. Cabasson became increasingly frustrated, and the angrier he became, the funnier the monkey became, and the more people laughed. Finally, someone told the priest to look behind him, and then he laughed with everyone else. The sermon was cancelled. A quick note before we continue with our story. This channel produces niche content at a slow pace, owing to the production cost, so the YouTube algorithm has a tendency to not show these videos to a broader audience. The channel is dependent on views in order to survive, so if you enjoy this content, it is crucial that you click the subscribe button and notification bell, and give the video a like and a comment to show the almighty algorithm that it is interesting. Donations, channel memberships, and especially Patreon support helps immensely. On Patreon you can, for just $1 a month, enjoy the videos as they are intended, without ads, sponsorships, or interruptions like this one. Sorry McFlurry, back to the pets. Farm animals weren't necessarily kept aboard as pets, even if they can be pleasant companions. Instead, they were primarily kept in order to provide food in the form of meat, milk, and eggs. Cows were one of the most common shipboard animals, at least aboard larger vessels. Even just 1 or 2 cows took up a lot of space that smaller ones, such as sloops or brigantines, simply did not have. If the pirates did not have space for the cattle they had stolen or purchased, they would butcher them on the spot and smoke the meat into barbecue, essentially a type of jerky. But if there was space, they would bring the cows aboard and keep them in stockyards below deck. One of the big issues with bovines and similar animals was the food. They couldn't just eat anything, so the pirates would have to acquire hay in whatever way possible. If they ran out of fodder, or if the animal was wounded or debilitated, or if there was just a need for meat, it would be butchered and cooked. Bovines could be stolen or even given as ransom to pirates. When Henry Morgan captured the city of Maracaibo, he received a ransom of 500 beeves for sparing the city from fire. Cows could also be purchased. And this was especially common on the island of Madagascar, where the locals were especially friendly to pirates, and would keep large herds of native bovine, distinguished by the large bumps on their backs. Pigs were another common sight aboard sail ships. Bones recovered from the Queen Anne's Revenge, the wreck of Blackbeard's ship, points to the pirate keeping a herd of swine, even piglets. These could be kept in a partition in the forecastle, but one ship had hogs, sheep, and goats inside of a ship's boat. Some piglets, even whole pigs, were allowed to roam the ship freely, making noise and sometimes vomiting from the motions of the sea, much to the amusement of the crew. In a storm or battle, they had to be cooped up again. Pigs were some of the most common farm animals aboard, along with sheep and goats. The latter provide the same services as cows, but take up less space, and might have a more flexible diet. Just don't leave them alone with the resident Welshman or Middle Easterner. Chicken were also common aboard, being especially valued for their eggs. Though some would certainly roam freely, especially during calm weather, they would mostly be kept in coops, often in the back of the ship. Sometimes a rooster or two were kept, usually for eating, but aboard Spanish ships for cockfighting. Other poultry were kept as well: turkeys, ducks, and geese. Sea turtles were wild animals, and one of the delicacies most favored by pirates and colonists. There is a reason why the turtle is near extinct. Pirates would usually slaughter them fresh, but sometimes they'd tip them over on their backs to prevent them from escaping, essentially as a form of fresh storage. Turtles were sometimes taken aboard the ship and kept until they could be butchered. Since they needed water to stay alive, they'd often be kept just behind a hawse hole in the forecastle, through which seawater would occasionally splash. That is essentially it for farm animals: pigs, goats, sheep, chicken, cows, turkeys, geese, and ducks were all commonly found aboard sail ships in the period, including pirate ones. Cats were a relatively common sight on a ship, usually taken aboard as private pets, with some perhaps making the excuse that they'd be hunting vermin. Perhaps they could, but cats are also known for being notoriously lazy. Aboard the Signet, a Buccaneer ship that crossed the Pacific, the crew decided to feed their 2 cats the same ration as them, even when the men were starving. This incident shows, for one, that the cats didn't sustain themselves on vermin, but also that even when desperately needing food, the Buccaneers refused to eat their own pets. Others were not so patient. Privateer Captain George Shelvach documented how his crew, when hungry, ate stray cats on a Pacific island. Shelvach could not bring himself to eat cat, even when his men called the meat sweet and nourishing. Note again that these were stray cats on land and not shipboard pets, but it does give an idea of some of the attitudes for or against eating cats. More popular than cats were dogs, for much the same reasons. It was just nice to have a friendly companion aboard. Privateer Captain Woods Rogers had an English bulldog aboard as the ship's mascot. One pirate captain explicitly known for his fondness of dogs was Edward Lowe, usually known on the interwebs for his exaggerated cruelty. He wasn't really any worse than any other pirate. According to one of Lowe's captives, Philip Ashton, Lowe had a dog as a personal pet. At one point, some of the crewmen forgot it ashore, and it stood on the beach howling for its master. Lowe immediately demanded that they return and fetch it, and the men he sent used the opportunity to desert, so the captain never saw his beloved companion again. Some will probably dispute my favorable note on Captain Lowe, and if you do, I'd suggest you'd check out my episode on him. Returning again to the Pacific voyage of the Signet, Captain Swan also had 2 dogs, who the crew shared their provisions with, and like the cats, refused to eat them. But again, not every crew was so generous. William Dampier, then aboard the Signet, had previously sailed with Basil Ringrose in South America, who wrote that on Christmas Eve, the Buccaneers butchered a large hog for dinner, but thinking it would not suffice, also decided to buy a spaniel dog from the quartermaster for 40 pieces of 8, killed and cooked him. Dog for Christmas dinner, yummy. Dogs were often more useful than cats. They could be put on guard duty, used for pursuing escaped enemies, and hunting. Shelvach documented how a small bitch was able to catch almost any number of fish in just an hour. That's a good girl. The best hunting dogs of the New World were those kept by the Buccaneer, the piratical hunters on the island of Hispaniola, and subject of my last episode. These animals had initially been brought by the Spanish in the 16th century to hunt for indigenous rebels. When the Spanish had no further need for the dogs, they released them into the wilderness, where they sustained themselves on other animals released by the Spanish: pigs, cows, goats, horses. The dogs were of different breeds, including mastiffs and bloodhounds, lebreles de presa. They hunted in large packs, often 50, threescore, or more. They would assault an entire herd of wild boars, not stopping until they had felled 2 or 3. The hunters would sometimes amuse themselves by climbing into trees and observing the animals. In one incident, a pack of dogs surrounded a single, wounded boar that had killed and wounded several with his tusks and teeth. The impasse continued for an hour, until one dog managed to get on the pig's back, ending him with a bite to the throat. The victorious dog ate until he was full, and only then were the rest allowed to dig in. The wild dogs soon became a nuisance on Saint-Domingue, as they threatened the population of wild pigs. These were essential for the island's economy. Governor d'Ogeron soon ordered a quantity of poison, which he leached inside of dead horses. The horses were then put in the wilderness and devoured by the dogs, who then perished. However, it didn't have much of an effect. The hunters would steal the pups from the wild mothers and raise them into the perfect hunting dogs. Some hunters would specialize in dog breeding specifically. The hunters traveled with large packs of up to 30 dogs, using them to track and trap the prey before shooting it. The hunters were close allies of the Buccaneers. Hell, the Buccaneers derived their name from them, since they would so often join them on their expeditions. Many Buccaneers became hunters, and many hunters became Buccaneers. They would bring their dogs with them on their expeditions for the purposes of hunting and tracking. In a few cases, they were even reused for their ancient manhunting purposes. Mosley's Privateers was a mercenary group of former Buccaneers, employed by the English during King Philip's War. An alliance of indigenous tribes led by Metacomet, alias King Philip, came close to destroying the foreign colonies. Having battled the Spanish across the Main, the privateers were experts at swamp and guerrilla fighting, and according to Governor Easton, carried with them several dogs that proved serviceable to them in finding out the enemy in the swamps. Mosley was a bit too effective. He had picked up a number of interrogation techniques previously used to extort money and information. His native captives were often shot after their session, and one captive woman was torn in pieces by dogs. The privateers would round up the so-called praying Indians, who had converted to Christianity and allied with the English, burning their towns without any permission from the colonial leaders. Aside from the animals willingly brought aboard the ship, the wooden vessels were likewise host to a number of vermin, including rats, cockroaches, and even sharks that followed in the wake of the ship. Rats and cockroaches primarily infested the bilge, the dark bottom compartment, where all the filth seeping down from the upper decks would gather and fester. A whiff of this terrible concoction was enough to knock a sailor off his feet and could turn silverware black. The darkness was pierced by the glowing red eyes, the calm swelling of the ocean broken up by the chattering and clacking mandibles. Rats could make ventures to the upper decks in search of food, and when the ship was being cleaned, they had to be chased out by smoke. The cockroaches could be used in horrifying torture methods. In one of them, the pirates would begin by forcing their victim to run a gauntlet of stabbing needles. Afterwards, he was put in a barrel full of sugar and cockroaches, who would bite him as they pleased. Sharks would likewise follow the wake of the ship, knowing that trash would be dumped overboard for them to get an easy meal. They would basically eat anything. Old food, rope, beddings, even a hammer was found inside of a shark. And yes, they would eat humans. There are even accounts of individual pirates being eaten by sharks, usually when swimming in a dangerous area. However, walking the plank was never documented as a tactic until some decades after the golden age of piracy. A lot of you watching engage in various forms of creative endeavors, ranging from novel writing to game design. Some of you have expressed interest or contacted me for consultation in your projects. So with the advice from one of my clients, I have set up a Fiverr account where you can now hire me to consult on your project. I offer research, proofreading, editing, and critique. Or we can just spitball ideas. You'll find a link in the video description or pinned comment below. Otherwise, support Gold Gunpowder by liking the video, giving your thoughts on the video, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell. Monetarily by buying some merch or becoming a Patreon supporter, where $1 a month gets you early, ad-free, and sponsor-free access to my videos.